I don't think that the evolutionary analysis of altruism, namely how it came to be that our species even has the capacity to be altruistic, I don't think that provides a grounds for defensible altruism. For one thing, one of the explanations is nepotism. That is, you favor your own genetic relatives. I think that's highly interesting as a scientific explanation for a lot of our moral feelings. I don't think that that is a set of guidelines to act upon, nor do the other mechanisms such as reciprocal altruism give us ethical guidance. It's really not what they're for. It's the scientific analysis of how our species developed its moral sense is different from the moral project of how we ought to behave. Now, I think they intersect in the sense that part of becoming a better person is knowing what our inborn ethical intuitions are, many of which are actually rather ugly, such as moralizing obedience to authority, conformity to social norms, maintaining purity, principles which you can explain why we evolved with them, but they don't survive the light of scrutiny as to moral principles that you should that you should encourage. So I do think that it is a combination of a commitment to human flourishing, to happiness, to life, to health, to freedom, to knowledge, to beauty, and the application of reason that gives us the grounds for morality. Also, there's a bit of a non sequitur in the inference that if science can't explain everything, then that means that science and religion must work together, because science and religion aren't the only two alternatives. There's also secular moral philosophy or moral reasoning. And those propositions that are not empirical or not scientific, obviously we do have to think about them, such as morality, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a religion from which we get our morality.
And so, David, this one last question for you before we go to the audience. We often hear in the media about Christian opposition to biological evolution, partly because embracing evolution commits one to a vision of God's creation as intentionally violent, nature bred in tooth and claw. As a Christian, what is your reaction to evolution in general and the possibility of evolutionary altruism in particular?
So on the evolution question, as a Christian, I believe that the Bible is authoritative, and that it's my primary authority. I also believe that that the book of nature is part of how we understand who we are and how the universe works. And in Christian tradition, we often talk about the book of Revelation and the book of nature. When you look at what the Bible says and you look at what people are finding out or thinking about evolutionary theory, they often seem to be in tension. I do think there are some tensions. I also think that the evidence for evolution is very strong as a scientific matter, and I have some thoughts about how they fit together, what God was doing with the opening chapters of Genesis. But I think as a Christian, we need to focus both on what Revelation is, what the Bible says, and what we see around us. And what we see around us, I believe, is very strong evidence for evolution. And so that's how I think on that issue. On the issue of evolutionary altruism, I mean, my reaction is very similar to Steve's. I do think there's some very interesting theory about altruism and how it would be based in kinship. One of the things that's striking about it to me is how far beyond it Jesus' call to love your neighbor as yourself goes. So Steve talks a lot, as Peter Singer talks a lot, about the expanding circle and how our sympathy, hundreds of or thousands of years ago probably would have been just for our family and our kin group. But as we have more exposure to other groups around the world, our empathy is expanding. Jesus got there thousands of years ago. Jesus said that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves, not just our family, not just our particular group. So I find it fascinating where this is going. It doesn't seem to me that evolutionary theory and altruism gets us there, gets us to a vision of morality. So I do agree with Steve on this, although I personally find it very difficult to demonstrate an objective basis for morality outside of the God of the Bible. The attempts to do it in moral philosophy strike me as pretty thin, at least at this point. But we're on the same page in the sense of thinking that that's where you have to go. You're not going to get a moral system from what we're learning about altruism from an evolutionary perspective. What that's telling us is It's telling us why it is, or trying to explain to us why we might have these feelings. It's not telling us why we ought to have those feelings. It is not a source of obligation. The God of the Bible is a source of obligation. I don't think you can find a similar source of obligation in moral philosophy, but lots of folks try.